Welcome to the Art Colony, a podcast about art and art history in Provincetown. My name is Gaston Lacombe. My art gallery in Provincetown, Studio Lacombe, is located in the center of town in a building called the Whalers Wharf. I guess you could describe the Whalers Wharf as an open-air shopping plaza, or maybe a pedestrian street. At street level, we have a number of art galleries, shops. We have the offices of the Provincetown Independent newspaper, and a beautiful scenic exit to the Provincetown Harbor. On the second floor and third floor, there are multiple artist studios, Provincetown's Water's Edge Cinema, a restaurant, and some offices. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, the reason I'm telling you this is because in the summer, on a very regular basis, people come to my gallery in the Whalers Wharf and outright say, I would like to get my portrait done. At first, this left me very perplexed because that's not what I do. I usually just point at the paintings on my wall and say, that's not what I do. But then they add, yeah, but the Whalers Wharf is where you come to get your portrait done, right? Or they say, but I got my portrait done here when I was a kid, and I want my child to have a portrait like that too, or my grandchild. So there seems to be something I don't know there. And recently I found someone who can tell me the story of why people come to my gallery in the Whalers Wharf asking to get their portrait done. So today, to talk about the tradition of portrait making in Provincetown, I have with me artist and instructor Glenna Hartwell. So welcome, Glenna.
Thank you so much, Gaston. Wonderful introduction.
So, to start, who is Glenna Hartwell?
Well, I'm a lifelong artist and portrait artist. I'm also a graphic designer, just now stepping into the world of AI in my day job. But I've been a lifelong fine artist and student of Henchey in Provincetown and a few other teachers I've studied with here as well.
So you are an instructor at the Cape School of Art.
Yes, that's correct.
And you were teaching just today, right?
Yes, I was. We had a wonderful time teaching, looking out over the harbor.
So what do you teach?
I teach portraits, but at the Cape School of Art, we teach color. We aim to teach a methodology of seeing and perceiving color and light as taught by artist Henchey and his predecessor, Charles Hawthorne. And this school started in 1899.
So I saw that you teach mudheads.
Yes.
Mudheads is a word that comes up very often when we talk about art in
Yes.
Provincetown. And before I moved here, I had never heard of a mudhead.
Ah.
So tell us, what is a mudhead?
Yes, it's a great term, isn't it?
Yeah.
The word mudhead came about because Charles Hawthorne would grab various townspeople as models and bring them out to the beach, sit them down in the bright, bright sunlight, and paint them with the sun sometimes backlighting the model. So the head, when the sun is behind the head, or especially if the person is wearing a hat and the head is in the shade, that head can look almost like the color of mud. If you've ever noticed, I don't know, anything in your window with the sunlight behind it, you know how it becomes darker?
All types of shades of brown.
Right. So that is where that term came from, mudhead. And also it had to do with the way of teaching that we still try to teach students at the Cape School, which is to not focus on the individual features at first, but to just get the general color of the head. And sometimes the head and neck together, the front of the shirt would all be a deep, dark color because they were backlit. So you wouldn't even see the features of the person. So it was just called a mudhead. It's almost like a slab, with this bright beach background.
And in Provincetown, in many houses, they tend to have a framed mudhead.
Yeah.
Something they found in a heap of garbage somewhere or inside a wall somewhere.
Exactly.
And they are extremely precious nowadays.
Exactly. In fact, one of my teachers, Hilda Neely, found a bunch of mudheads behind a wall in one of the old buildings near Henchey's studio, and they just took them all out. And that's why often when you see these mudheads, they'll have little pinholes all over them. And that's because they were They were tacked up and used as insulation behind the walls.
When were those painted?
Well, they were painted anytime between 1899 and probably they could have been painted as late as the 60s, I would say. Some of them are very, very old, and you will see the 1920s, 1930s clothing. So some of them are ancient, and they're surprisingly good.
Well, that's good. So tell me about the experience of painting on the beach. When we see pictures of Charles Hawthorne in the early 1900s, it's
Mhm.
almost always of him on the beach with ladies with their big 1900 gowns,
Yeah.
big hats and umbrellas,
Yes.
and they're on the beach painting. And you
Yes.
were doing that this weekend, so it's been going on since
It's been going
1899.
on, yes, since
So tell me
yeah.
about that experience. What is it like to sit on the
Oh,
beach
yeah.
and paint?
It's the most wonderful thing in the world. We don't wear those, big giant 1800s dresses anymore, and Charles Hawthorne painted in a white suit and always stayed clean. Just today, I painted in a black sweatshirt, and I got paint all over it, but it's wonderful to be in the open air, near the harbor, near the water, hearing the sounds of people walking to and from the ferries, hearing the birds, hearing the seagulls, and the light in Provincetown, of course. People come here because the ocean is on 3 sides. So this place with water on 3 sides of it has the most wonderful light. I think people say the best light other than Paris, outside of France.
And Paris doesn't have an ocean.
Right. I should have said that France, but where the original impression is painted.
Okay.
But Provincetown probably has the second best light. The
Mhm.
light is amazing. When you're here, you get used to it, but when you leave the Cape, you might realize that everything's a little dull. As painters, we're used to looking at the light and the color, and when you first leave Provincetown, you can't see it as well, and you're thinking, "What's wrong with my painting?" But, standing there in that wonderful light and color, painting models with the water behind them, it's knowing that you're carrying on a tradition that's been going on for 126 years. I'm so proud to be there, and just today, I told all my students we were standing in the little pocket park on McMillan Wharf looking over the harbor, and I said, "Everyone look out, look at the beach over there. That's where Charles Hawthorne stood in 1899 and painted." And we kind of just all stood still for a moment and just thought about that. It's so amazing.
It's amazing how history is everywhere in this town.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It is.
So when you're painting outside on the beach, do you get the wind bugging you? Do you get the
Yes.
sand falling in your paint?
Yes. Yes. So for the wind, what we do, and I think one of our teachers named Chris Smeraldi is sort of the master of the iron sash weights that he got out of old windows, old window frames. We tie them on a rope, and I guess it's almost like having an anchor of a boat, but we tie them to the center of our easel, and then the easel won't blow away. Because if you forget to do that, your easel is fine until you put your painting board on the easel, and then it can just fall over like it's a sail. Now, sometimes also you can lash your painting bag, your backpack, to the center of that easel to keep it from falling. Today, I actually bungee corded my easel to a tree. It was right next to me, so I was kind of lashed to this
Very
tree.
resourceful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the sand, yes.
Okay,
I
yes.
just wanted to mention the sand. Yeah, you do get sand in your painting, and people are always having paintings tumble off and fall in the sand or their palette. But one nice thing about getting sand in your painting, once your painting's dry, you can brush that sand off.
Okay.
So, not too much of a problem.
And I'm the type of person, when people come into my gallery, they want to watch me work, I start almost to shake. And I usually say, "I'm sorry, I don't perform." But if you're painting outside on the beach, you probably have dozens of people stopping by to look at you.
People were stopping by today, and it doesn't bother me at all because I come from a tradition of painting portraits in a studio, and people sometimes would be 6 deep behind all the artists painting in there. It wasn't that crowded today, but people take pictures, people sometimes ask you questions, and we just know that we're a part of people's kind of tourist experience of coming to Provincetown, and we'll make our way into their iPhone photo library. But it doesn't bother me at all, and I'm happy to answer questions. Sometimes the comments you hear are really funny. As an impressionist, we use a lot of color in our work, and we might use colors that you wouldn't expect to be in a certain feature of the face, such as I remember one time someone said to me behind me as I was painting, "Why is she putting blue in the lips? Lips aren't blue." And, things like that. You'll hear people critiquing you,
Mhm.
or as a portrait artist, you hope to hear, "It looks just like him." And sometimes they'll say, "It doesn't look like him." And sometimes they'll say to the model sitting, "It looks just like you."
So much interference.
You know, eh, it's the kind of thing I'm sure as someone who does business in Provincetown, at the beginning of the season, you like it, you're happy. When August, September rolls around and you're getting a little burned out, it might be irritating, but
It's a daily process.
yeah, yeah.
In my case, since I sit in my own gallery all day, often people don't know that I'm the artist. So they come in and they start commenting and they start pointing. And usually when they do that, I'll say, "Oh, thank you." And then they turn around and they go, "Are you the
Are
artist?"
you the artist? Yeah.
But you just mentioned something about doing portraits with 6 people deep.
Mhm.
So what are we talking about here? You told me you were here in the 70s and the 80s
Yes.
doing portraits of people on the street?
Yeah, and
Tell me
this
about
was
that.
in the '70s.
Oh, in the
I worked
70s.
here from my first summer was '76, and I worked through '79. It was an incredible experience, and I'm so glad I had that experience early in my life, because it was unforgettable, and I heard a rumor that in Provincetown, you can get a job just doing people's portraits and make, like, $30 a portrait, and I thought that was a lot of money.
Probably
So
was back then.
it was back then, so I came up to town with just a few dollars in my pocket in March to see if I could get a spot doing this, and I came to town, my first time in Provincetown, and someone said, "Go talk to Malcolm, Newman in the Governor Bradford, and that's where you can find him." So I found Malcolm Newman there. He was the owner of the studio called the Starving Artist Studio. And I went in there, and of course, I was a young chippy back then, so, I just he saw me, and I guess he was taken with me a little bit, and he said, of course, you can have a spot, come back in May, I'll give you a spot in the studio." So, I thought, "Great." I went back home to New Jersey, and summer came, I packed up all my stuff, I did all these sample portraits, came up, and he did not remember me. He had been drunk in the Governor Bradford. Didn't remember me at all.
Mhm.
So, what should I do? I set up, my dad lived in Chatham. He built me a little wooden portrait stand, and I set up in the Land's End parking lot. And I set up
That's a
out there.
hardware store.
That's a hardware store here in
Yeah.
town. I set up there. There was already a caricature artist there, and, he was in front of me, so I was behind him, and he didn't like it that I was there, and he wasn't very nice, but I sat up there, and I started doing portraits, didn't know what I was doing, and I noticed down the street was this starving artist studio that I'd heard about, and further down, in this place called Whalers Wharf, there was another group of portrait artists in the front as you face the building. They were in an open air lineup along the pathway as you walk into Whalers Wharf, and they were all sitting there too doing portraits. So I first saw the portraits in the Starving Artist Studio, and I want to mention one artist, Tom Moore, who was my mentor. He has since passed away, taught me so much of what I know. I saw his portrait at night lit up in the Starving Artist Studio. It was closed, but they had his portrait under a spotlight. And he had that Henry Henchey color because he was a student of Henry Henchey from the Cape School of Art. And it was the first time I'd ever seen that color. I couldn't believe it. And I felt like I should just put my tail between my legs and go home because my portraits were brown and beige. So as the summer went on, I learned and learned, and I started learning this color. And the portrait artist would come up and talk to me and give me tips, all very generous. And the next summer, I guess Malcolm Newman, he felt badly that he hadn't remembered me, and he thought he liked the idea that I'd come up anyway and set up in the parking lot. So the next summer, he gave me a spot in the studio. So that's how I came to work there.
So paint us a picture.
I will.
1976, 1977,
Yeah.
Provincetown. What was Provincetown like? Who was here? What sort of town was this?
Norman, who's the author?
Norman Mailer.
Norman Mailer was here. The A House, you would hear the thumping of disco music every night coming out of the A House.
Well, that hasn't changed much.
That hasn't changed too much, but it was Donna Summer. It was the time, 1976, 77, the time of disco. So you would hear that all the time. The men wore the high-waisted bell-bottom jeans, and they looked very sharp. And they all had mustaches. All the guys had mustaches, no beards, just mustaches. And
feathered hair?
Yeah, they did. They did have the feathered hair or the hair drapes,
Mm-hmm.
And there was also a hippie faction back then. The town was much more bohemian, as I'm sure you've heard. Housing was cheap. So all the crazy people kind of rolled across the country, and Provincetown was as far as they could go, and they all ended up here. And I'm sure that's what people still say today. I remember John Waters a lot being here, and Divine was in the parade.
Carnival.
But they didn't call it Carnival back then.
It started in 78, Carnival?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I remember the parade, but I don't remember it being called Carnival. And I remember Divine being on a float. And I also remember the first guy in the parade, the very first time I saw it was a guy in a Darth Vader costume with roller skates. And it wasn't as big as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
It was just kind of a little parade. And
so you came here as a starving artist?
Yes,
Where
literally.
did you live?
Well, you could find a really cheap place. I think I paid $100 a month in rent back then. And there were a lot of folks, Portuguese folks then, who owned their whole, it wouldn't be, a house wouldn't be divided into condos. It was a whole house. So you could rent a room. And one person I rented from had very strict rules. You had to be home by a certain time. You couldn't invite anyone of the opposite sex over. It was very, very strict. And I lived there one summer. Another summer I lived on Beach Point, and I used to bike there at the end of work. I had a cottage there that, again, was, probably $100, $125 a month. And to rent a place, I would just, at the beginning of the summer, just walk around and knock on doors. There was no internet, of course, no cell phone. So I would literally knock on doors. Do you have anything for rent? And I would find a place that way. And we worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So it was busy.
So you were working doing these portraits.
Mm-hmm.
How did it work? Did you just set up on the street and people lined up? Or what was the infrastructure?
When my first summer, that's how it worked. People would walk by. They would come up to me and look. I had samples behind me. And we used to have samples of celebrities so that people could see we knew how to make it look like someone.
And this was in paint, in pastel?
Pastel. Rembrandt pastels we all used.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a portrait of Muhammad Ali done in pastel behind me, one of Marilyn Monroe. I probably had John Lennon, and people would come up and look at those. And then I would get questions similar to what you get. People would suddenly realize I did them, and these are yours? And I would say, yes, and then I would pitch, and would you like to get one done? Would you like to get a portrait done? And I think 16 by 20s were $25, and 18 by 24 were probably $35. And we often did double portraits where two people would sit. That was really interesting too, because with same-sex couples, you would have to figure out who you should put in the dominant position.
Okay.
So usually, with couples of the opposite sex, I would put the man on the bottom and the woman would be on the top because she would have a smaller head, so it would work better compositionally. But, that was always something interesting to figure out, and I would have to consult with them sometimes about that too.
So how long did it take you to make a portrait of them?
Well, we were supposed to do it in 45 minutes.
Wow.
And I would sometimes be able to do that, but sometimes an hour and a half even. And many of the artists, or not many, but a few of the artists in the studio were also students of Henry Henchey. So we were all learning from each other. Like I said, my mentor, Tom Moore, that I mentioned in the beginning, that person whose portrait I had seen lit up by a spotlight, I was lucky enough to wind up working next to him. And I learned so much from that man. So I learned almost everything I know. And then in the morning, I would paint with Henry Henchey at the Cape School of Art. So I would go up there 8 o'clock in the morning, then come back, have a bite to eat, and start doing portraits. And I probably did miles of portraits. Sometimes you would have, do 5, 6 in one day, and it was exhausting. It was really tiring.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happened? And you were doing this outside?
Well, the first summer I did it outside.
In the parking lot?
In the parking lot. And this was before Land's End had that addition
Okay.
put on it. So from the parking lot, you could see the harbor. And it was beautiful, just beautiful. Of course, the second year I was in Starving Artist Studio, I did try sitting doing portraits in Whalers Wharf one year too. But those portraits we were really encouraged to work more quickly there. It was a little more commercial, and they didn't tolerate as much of this fine art nonsense and this Henry Henchey nonsense. So I wound up going back to...
What did they expect?
They expected that you would do a more, we would call it kind of a stainless steel look, where the skin of the person is smooth. You don't use a lot of crazy colors. Everything is basically, beige or brown skin,
Okay.
red lips, just more commercial, something Mr. and Mrs. America would think is proper for a portrait. Like the Breck girl. Do you remember those portraits? Breck shampoo advertised portraits back in the day.
I was born and raised in Canada.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
of course you don't remember that.
I might not. I mean, I did get TV from Bangor, Maine, but I probably don't remember those.
No, some people will remember the Breck girl portraits. Very smooth skin, slick. I know someone out there will remember that.
Well,
but
good.
we were encouraged to work that way at Whalers Wharf. But at the Starving Artist Studio, we could use a little more of our techniques we were learning at the Cape School of Art.
So when people were coming up to you to get their portrait done, did you come up with any strange situations or funny situations? Do you have any stories from doing this kind of work?
Oh, there were a lot of funny stories. One time I had this child sitting in the chair, and he kept moving around. Kids are hard to do because, it's hard for them to sit still. So this little kid was sitting there, and his head was starting to droop. He was getting sleepy. So his head was getting lower and lower. And I told him, raise your chin. I wanted him to, just hold his head back up. And I didn't see him do it. And I said, honey, raise your chin up a little bit. And no, I'm sorry. His head was going backwards, and I was telling him to lower his chin. That's what it was. Sorry about that. Said, honey, lower your chin. So I started to notice his chin. He was actually going like this.
His chin was dropping.
And he was making his chin go lower because he thought that's what I meant.
Okay.
And another time, we would have women who would be quite vain, and one of the artists would say, the woman would be like, don't put in my wrinkles, make me look good, make my hair look good. And I remember one of the artists saying, honey, you could be a bowl of strawberries for all I care. So we would we would be sitting there, and Malcolm was very strict about not having the men sit facing out, because picture these 6 guys sitting in a semicircle facing the street with their legs spread. And Malcolm used to say, it's a crotch show. Turn around, face your board. And he literally would not let us face out for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And, the first summer I was in there, I was very timid about soliciting work, pitching to get work. And we were encouraged to stand at the door of the studio. It was open air. And we were encouraged to stand there, lean against the pillars, and just, talk to people as they went by. So I would be sort of draped, around this column, just, you want to get one done? You want to get one done? And I really started feeling like I was soliciting something other than a portrait. Just come on in, come on. It was like being on well, you're Canadian,
I
but
know Times
being on Times Square, come on in.
So lots of characters, but was anybody famous?
Oh,
Nowadays in Provincetown, we see famous people all the time.
we
Was it
don't
the same
it
situation?
really wasn't. No, we didn't see that many famous people. Um, we saw the most famous person I saw was Norman Mailer, and I did see him in what was then called the Café Blasé. It's
Mhm.
now called Patio. I saw him there, and like I said, I used to see John Waters. Yeah, we used to see Playboy Playmates also in what's now Patio.
Okay.
The owner back then was very handsome, and I guess he seemed like a wealthy man, and I would always see him with these women who I found out later were, in Playboy because some of my friends wrote for the New Yorker back then, and I remember one friend of mine crafting this one woman's bio for Playboy, for her piece in Playboy, and he was writing it for her, and they were completely making it up. They were making things up to put
Mhm.
for her bio, so that was funny, but a lot of writers, a lot of theater people, but I didn't really meet famous celebrities back then.
You told me a story at some point about throwing pastels on the
Oh,
street.
yeah, that's a great memory. We would use our pastels up until they were down to very small, half-inch nubbins, and then they were kind of useless, we couldn't use them anymore, so everybody would just chuck them into the street when they were done and take out a fresh pastel. So, people would sometimes do that all at once, they're cleaning out their whole boxes, throw them in the street, and the cars would run over the pastels, and so the street would wind up being rainbow colored. It was really beautiful.
Where was the Starving Artist Studio?
At the intersection of McMillan Wharf and Commercial Street. It was on by what's today John's Footlongs, which I think was back then might have still been John's Footlongs. And on the corner there was a fudge shop. So they made handmade fudge there in a giant kettle. They were always cooking fudge. So we smelled that all the time. It was really sights and smells that you don't have today because it always smelled like fish because there was commercial fishing on McMillan Wharf back then. And you would hear the motor of the conveyor belt bringing the fish from the boats up to be processed. And it was a little stinky sometimes, and there were tons of seagulls. So that was a good memory with the pastels. And like I said, there were a lot of people in town who were a little off, a little crazy. And one of them was Howling Jack. And he was this huge guy. You would hear him coming from a mile away. He would be coming down Commercial Street toward the studio, and he was drunk, and he would literally be shouting and howling, but it was almost like poetry. He was very intelligent. So we would hear him from far away, and he would get closer and closer, and then he would talk to some of the guys in the studio. And I remember one time he sold me a fur coat, some kind of ratty old fur coat, but I was afraid of him because he was so intelligent. And, there was this other guy who used to sell strawberries. He used to, wheel a strawberry cart down Commercial Street, this old man, and I have a picture of him somewhere, and he didn't have any teeth, and he would be calling his wares and calling out, "Strawberries, all ripe," but since he didn't have any teeth, it sounded like he was saying, "Robbery, all night." And when we got really busy, you could tell we got busy because their pastels would be breaking and
Mhm.
flying out because we would just be so busy and hurrying so much to get done.
So you had all these artists here through your time working, creating portraits, creating memories for all the visitors as well. When did this stop? Because nowadays we don't have this
No,
culture of portrait making on the street or in
no.
studios anymore. When did that stop?
I believe it stopped in the early '80s. Now, my last year was '79, and I think the portrait artists Starving Artists closed, I'm thinking in '82, and nobody really knows the exact reason why the artist stopped, But I think it's economical. I think, like I said, the Starving Artist Studio and Whalers Wharf made its money by selling frames. And so when a portrait was done, they would encourage the person to buy a frame for it. And they marked up the frames double.
So the money that the person would pay for the portrait would go to you.
Yes,
Then if they bought a frame, that would go to fund the studio.
correct.
Okay.
Correct. So we were told to push the frames, and they marked these frames up a lot. And I think eventually that wasn't enough to sustain the rents of the buildings, and the prices of the buildings went up. And it also became more difficult for artists to find lodgings. So, there just wasn't as much of a place for artists to do it.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, rents are very high, very high in this town nowadays.
Yeah,
And also, the Whalers Wharf burnt down in
exactly.
1998,
Yep.
and then it was rebuilt, and pretty much, from what I understand, looking sort of the same as before, but not of wood, of metal.
Right.
So it won't burn down again.
Right.
But people still come, as I said, to my gallery, wanting to have their portrait done, and they don't know that it burnt down. They say, yeah, I remember I was right here.
I was right here.
Yeah,
Yes.
I remember this thing. And I tell them, well, this building burnt down in 98 and it was rebuilt, and they don't believe me.
They're like, "No, no, no." And, yeah, I knew several of the artists in there. If I could just tell one more
Yes, of
quick
course.
story. There was one artist named Ron Jackson, big, large African American guy, shaved head, great, great artist, and he had narcolepsy, and he would be drawing people, and we all kept our pastels in a box in front of us, and he would be drawing, and all of a sudden, boom, his head would hit the pastel box. I remember him so well. He was such a nice guy, and a lot of them, unfortunately, are no longer with us.
Yeah, I wonder if some of them are still around and are listening now, and they might be able to write to us and send us more stories.
I hope they do. I
Yeah.
hope they do. I wanna give a shout out to all those portrait artists.
It was, I mean, it's definitely something that left its mark on people's memory because they
Yeah.
still come back today and ask. And when people ask me, where can I get my portrait done? I never really know what to say. And I was sitting in today preparing for this, trying to think of who actually does portraits in Provincetown nowadays. Um, I mean, we have still hundreds and hundreds of artists, but sort of the tradition of having somebody sit down and paint their portrait is not as alive as it used to be. The first thing that came to mind is the artist that's right across from me in the Whalers Wharf, Eric Lesh. He's been in that gallery for 4 years. And pretty much his bread and butter is doing portraits of sexy hot men. And he doesn't necessarily do it in a realistic
No,
academic
I
style.
love his work.
It's
Yeah.
linear,
Yeah.
illustrative,
Yes.
very graphic, and people love it.
Yeah,
It's
very
beautiful.
popular.
Yeah. So he's one of those that does it where people can go up and say, "Can you do my portrait?" And Eric will say yes. But he works mostly, as I said, with young, sexy, hot men. I was also thinking of Jo Hay, who does portraits. Her portraits are not the kind where you sit and pose
Mhm.
for her. She will do portraits of mostly well-known people. She did this series of women who persisted. For example, there was a portrait of Senator Elizabeth Warren. There was a portrait of Rachel Maddow. There was a portrait of Greta Thunberg. A lot of important women.
Yes.
And that was shown at Women Work. And now Jo Hay's represented by On Center Gallery. But she does beautiful portraits. I also remember an exhibit a few years ago by Amy Kendall.
Mhm.
She had done portraits of artists in Provincetown in tandem. So they were two people per portraits, artists in Provincetown. And I was also thinking of my friend Donna Pomponio, who does portraits. But I had trouble coming up with names of artists who, really based their work on portraits.
One great place to go if you're interested in having a portrait done and you're not necessarily a hot, sexy man, although if you are, that's okay too. But the Egley Gallery, owned by Arthur Egley, he and his father both studied with Henry Henchey, and especially Arthur does, I believe, will do portraits, but his father, Cedric Egley, is a very well known portrait artist that you can commission. I will also take commissions,
Oh, good.
although I still have a 9 to 5 job as a graphic designer, but I do portraits as well. Not as much as I used to do, but I did a few well-known people after I left, um, street art.
And I was also thinking when I was going through this in my head that we still have in town a lot of live drawing events.
Yes, we do.
The museum organizes them, and
Mhm.
also the same Eric Lesh, along with my other neighbor in Whalers Wharf, Carlos Jimenez, who has a kilt shop,
Mm.
and his husband, John Von Moore, and also Phil Jimenez, no relation to Carlos, who's one of the top cartoon illustrators in the world. The four of them, they organize every Tuesday at Gifford House a live drawing event.
I heard about the Gifford House event
Yeah.
today, and by the way, I wanna mention in terms of caricature artists, one artist I worked with back then, or palled around with more like, is Robert Risco, and I th Robert Risco became the very well-known caricature artist Risco in New York City and has had books written, about him.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant guy.
So yes, we still have portraits happening in Provincetown. It's not completely dead, but we don't have people on the streets like you.
No, we don't, although I, later this summer, may be doing some quick sketches for fun and for old time's sake along McMillan Wharf outside of, one of the sheds there. So that may be happening some weekend, probably this fall.
Well, we'll be looking for you.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
This has been a fascinating conversation. I learned so much, and I think I've said this on every episode now. The reason I started the podcast is because I want to learn, and I learned a lot today. So thank you
so
so much for
glad.
this.
Thank you for this opportunity of talking about this part of Provincetown's history. It's an honor.
So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and until next time.